Angela was only 23 when life began testing her in ways she never expected. She lived in a small apartment on the corner of an old street where the paint peeled off the walls and the rent took almost everything she earned. She worked long hours at a diner during the day and cleaned offices at night. People often said she looked tired, but she carried herself with quiet strength. She did not have much money, yet she had something rare: an open heart. She never turned away when someone needed help, even though her own cupboards were often nearly empty. One winter evening, the city air was cold enough to make every breath sting. Angela was walking home after her late shift, holding her worn-out jacket close to her chest. As she passed the bus stop, she noticed 4 small figures sitting on the bench. At first, she thought they were just kids waiting for a late bus. But as she looked closer, she realized they weren't waiting for anything at all. Their clothes were thin, their shoes worn, and their faces carried the tired look of children who had no safe place to go. Angela slowed her steps. She saw the oldest, maybe 13, trying to keep the younger ones warm by wrapping his arms around them. A little girl no older than 7 was shivering, her small hands tucked into her sleeves. The other 2 sat silently, their eyes staring at the ground. Angela felt her heart ache. She could have walked away, most people would have. But something inside her refused to leave them there. She walked up slowly and asked, "Where are your parents?" The kids exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the oldest boy answered softly, "We don't have anywhere to go." His voice carried shame and fear, as if he had already said those words too many times to strangers who did nothing. Angela knelt down to meet their eyes. "Are you hungry?" she asked gently. The children nodded without speaking. Angela looked at her purse, knowing she only had a few dollars left until her next paycheck. But she also knew she could not leave them in the cold. "Come with me," she said. "I don't have much, but you'll be safe tonight." The children followed her quietly, almost as if they did not trust that anyone would really care. They entered her tiny apartment, which smelled faintly of soap and old coffee. It was not much: a single couch, a table with wobbly legs, and a small kitchen, but compared to the freezing bus stop, it felt like a warm palace. Angela quickly heated up some soup, pouring it into chipped bowls. She cut slices of bread and gave them to the children, who ate as if they had not seen food in days. She watched them with tears forming in her eyes, but she wiped them away before they could notice. She did not want pity to fill the room, only dignity. After they ate, she laid out blankets on the floor and gave them the couch. "You'll sleep here tonight," she said softly. The children looked at her in disbelief, as if kindness from a stranger was too rare to trust. The little girl whispered, "Why are you helping us?" Angela smiled sadly and replied, "Because someone should." That night, Angela lay awake on the floor, listening to the soft breathing of the children. Her apartment felt different now, not lonely but alive. She thought about her own life, the mistakes, the hardships, the people who had judged her without knowing her story. She had been struggling for years to keep herself together, yet here she was, responsible for 4 more lives. And strangely, it didn't frighten her. It felt right, as if this was the reason she had been put in that place at that time. The next morning, the neighbors noticed. Mrs. Carter from down the hall shook her head and muttered, "That girl is always taking on trouble. She can't even feed herself." Others whispered that it was reckless to take in children with no support. But Angela ignored the voices. She had grown used to people's doubts. She knew the world could be cruel, but she also knew that one act of love could change everything. The days turned into weeks, and the children slowly began to trust her. The oldest boy, whom she learned was named Marcus, helped wash dishes and looked after his younger siblings when Angela worked. The little girl, Jasmine, loved to draw on scraps of paper, covering the walls with her colorful imagination. The other 2, twins named Caleb and Corey, began to smile again, their laughter slowly returning after years of silence. Angela found herself juggling more than ever. She would rush from the diner to the office building, then hurry home to check homework, cook meals, and comfort nightmares. She was tired, sometimes completely drained, but every time she saw the children's faces light up when she walked through the door, she knew it was worth it. One evening, as she tucked Jasmine into bed, the little girl whispered, "Are you our mom now?" Angela's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to say yes, but she also knew the world did not work that simply. "I'm someone who loves you," she answered. "And that's what matters." The children clung to her words. For the first time in years, they felt like they belonged. And for the first time in her life, Angela felt like she had a purpose larger than her own survival. She did not know what the future held, or how she would manage with so little money and so many mouths to feed. But she knew those 4 children were hers now, whether the world approved or not. As the winter faded and spring arrived, Angela's life had changed completely. She no longer came home to silence, she came home to laughter, questions, and small hands reaching for hers. She often thought back to that night at the bus stop. If she had taken one step quicker or turned the other way, she never would have met them. But fate had placed them in her path, and she had said yes. What she did not know was how that one decision would shape the rest of her life. Nor could she imagine that, 20 years later, the same children she saved would return the gift and change her life forever. Angela's life changed more than she could have ever imagined after the children became part of her small apartment. Days grew longer, nights grew shorter, and the responsibilities seemed endless. She would wake up before sunrise, cook oatmeal for the children, and send them to school with second-hand backpacks and clothes carefully washed and mended. Then she rushed to the diner, served coffee and eggs with a smile, even when her feet ached. In the evening, she cleaned offices until her hands were raw from scrubbing. Yet no matter how tired she was, she always came home with enough warmth to tuck each child in, listen to their stories, and remind them that they mattered. The children were slowly becoming brighter and more hopeful. Marcus, the oldest, started excelling in school. His teachers noticed how hard he worked and praised him for his leadership. Jasmine, with her love for drawing, filled Angela's refrigerator door with sketches. Caleb and Corey, the twins, who once barely spoke a word, now laughed loudly and played games in the hallway. The neighbors who had first judged Angela began to soften when they saw the transformation. "Those kids are different now," Mrs. Carter whispered one day. "She really gave them life." But behind Angela's gentle smile was a storm she never spoke about. She had a past that weighed heavy on her, a past that people in the neighborhood often used against her. Years before, when she was still a teenager, Angela had been accused of being part of something she didn't do. A robbery had taken place, and because she had been nearby with the wrong people, suspicion fell on her. She was young, scared, and without money for a strong lawyer. Somehow, she managed to escape a sentence at that time, but the case had never disappeared. It lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to come back. Angela lived each day knowing her freedom was fragile. She tried to forget it, focusing on raising the children and keeping them safe. But life has a way of bringing back the past when least expected. One afternoon, after her diner shift, Angela came home to find 2 police cars parked near her building. Her heart dropped as soon as she saw them. The children were inside, sitting quietly at the kitchen table, confusion on their faces. An officer turned to her and said, "Angela Brown, we need you to come with us." The words cut through her like ice. Marcus jumped up. "She didn't do anything. She takes care of us." But the officers didn't listen. They had papers, warrants, and evidence they believed was enough to bring back the old case. Angela hugged each child quickly, whispering, "Be strong. I love you." Tears filled their eyes as she was led away in handcuffs. The news spread quickly. Angela Brown sentenced to life, the headline said weeks later. The children were taken to foster care, separated from each other, though they begged to stay together. For them, it was more than losing a caregiver, it was losing the only person who ever truly loved them. In prison, Angela carried herself with the same quiet strength she always had. She worked in the kitchen, she read books, she wrote letters. But what she thought about most were the 4 children she had left behind. She wondered if they were safe, if they were still in school, if they remembered her words. For the children, life became a battle. Marcus fought to keep them connected, writing letters to Angela whenever he could. Jasmine carried Angela's words in her heart like a promise, often whispering them at night when she felt alone: be strong. Never forget who you are. Caleb and Corey struggled with being moved from house to house, but they always held on to each other, telling anyone who would listen, we already have a mom. Her name is Angela. Years began to pass. The children grew older, but the memory of Angela never faded. They would sit together when they had a chance and talk about how she used to cook them soup, how she would walk miles just to find them better shoes, how she sacrificed everything to give them safety. These stories weren't just memories, they were fuel. Angela's case was unfair, and deep down, each of them knew it. As they matured, a thought began to take root in their minds: one day, they would find a way to free her. One day, the world would see who she truly was, not the criminal label that had been placed on her. Still, the road was hard. Angela spent birthdays, holidays, and milestones behind cold prison walls. The children learned to survive without her, but they never stopped believing that she was innocent. At school, Marcus studied harder than ever, determined to become someone who could fight the very system that had trapped Angela. Jasmine dreamed of telling her story through words and pictures. Caleb and Corey grew protective of each other, building strength from the pain of separation. Inside the prison, Angela's faith never broke. She often told the women around her about the 4 children she had taken in. They were my blessing, she said with a smile, even when her heart was heavy. Some laughed at her hope, telling her she'd never get out. But Angela always answered the same: those kids will make it. And one day, they'll come for me. The years rolled on, quietly yet steadily. The world outside kept changing, but Angela's story remained frozen in the walls of the prison. She did not know it yet, but the children she had saved were growing into the kind of people who could save her in return. And so, the cycle of love and sacrifice continued. Angela had given them her heart when she had almost nothing else to offer. In return, the seeds of determination grew inside each child. They carried her lessons with them as they walked into adulthood. The story was not over, it was only beginning. They were no longer the helpless kids at a bus stop. They were becoming the kind of people who could change the ending of Angela's life. Marcus was 18 the day he made a promise to himself. He had just graduated high school, wearing a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit, but he held his diploma with pride. As he walked off the stage, he looked up and whispered, "This is for you, Angela." He knew then what his life's mission would be. He would not rest until he found a way to fight for the woman who had saved him and his siblings. The years after Angela's sentence were not easy. Marcus carried the weight of being the eldest. He worked part-time jobs while studying, determined to pay for college without falling into the traps that swallowed many young men in his neighborhood. He stayed focused, driven by the memory of Angela's words: be strong, study hard, and never forget who you are. Those words lived in him like a heartbeat. Jasmine grew into a young woman with a gift for words and images. She studied journalism, often staying late in the campus library, piecing together stories of injustice. Each article she wrote, each class project she turned in, was rooted in the same thought: one day, she would tell Angela's story to the world. Her professors noticed her fire. "You write like someone who carries truth on her back," one of them said. She only smiled, knowing the truth she carried was Angela's. The twins, Caleb and Corey, were no longer the shy boys who once sat quietly at the bus stop. They became strong and resourceful. Corey was good with people. He could talk anyone into joining a cause. Caleb was quiet but sharp, with a natural gift for strategy and numbers. Together, they dreamed of building something bigger than themselves, something that could one day help fund the fight for Angela's freedom. As they each walked their separate paths, they never lost touch with one another. Every holiday, every birthday, every moment of significance they called, they visited, they shared memories of Angela. They reminded each other of who they were and why they could never stop. Marcus pursued law. His first years in college were exhausting. He worked nights to pay tuition and studied through the early hours of the morning. There were days he wanted to give up, but he would picture Angela standing in a courtroom, alone, without anyone to defend her. That picture fueled him more than any professor's lecture. One day, he told himself, "I'll stand where her lawyer once stood. Only this time, the truth will win." Jasmine landed an internship at a small local newspaper. She started by writing about community events, church fundraisers, and high school sports. But in her notebook at home, she wrote Angela's story again and again, shaping it into a narrative that could touch hearts. She didn't publish it yet, but she knew the time would come. Caleb studied technology, fascinated by how information could be used to uncover hidden truths. He built websites, created databases, and learned how to follow trails that others overlooked. Corey, on the other hand, worked with nonprofit groups, organizing food drives and shelters. He learned how to bring people together, how to gather voices until they were too loud to ignore. All four carried Angela with them. They were no longer children needing protection. They were young adults preparing for a mission. In prison, Angela continued to write them letters. Her handwriting was neat, her words full of love. She never complained about her situation, instead, she encouraged them to keep going. "You are my light," she wrote. "The world needs you to shine." Sometimes the letters took weeks to arrive, but each one was treasured like gold. By the time Marcus finished law school, the siblings were ready to act. Marcus began revisiting Angela's case files, searching through every page of court transcripts. He saw the gaps that a young Angela had been too powerless to fight. There were witnesses never questioned, evidence never tested, details ignored. It angered him, but it also strengthened his resolve. Jasmine finally wrote her first major article about wrongful convictions. She didn't mention Angela by name yet, but she poured her heart into every word. The piece drew attention, and soon she was invited to speak on panels and discuss the importance of truth in journalism. Slowly, she was building a voice strong enough to one day shout Angela's story from rooftops. Caleb created an online platform dedicated to cases like Angela's, where families of the wrongly convicted could share information and resources. It began small but grew as people across the country discovered it. Corey used his community connections to gather volunteers and organize events. Together, the twins built a network of people who cared about justice. The siblings knew they were still at the beginning. But they also knew they were no longer powerless children. Each had carved a path that led back to Angela. Every success, every late night of work, every sacrifice, they were preparing for the moment when they could fight for her freedom. And yet, the weight of time was heavy. Angela had already spent years behind bars. 20 years felt like a lifetime. Would they be able to reach her before her spirit faded? This question haunted them. But then they remembered who Angela was. She was the woman who gave her last meal to feed them. She was the woman who told them to be strong when she was being taken away in handcuffs. If she could keep hope alive in a prison cell, they could keep hope alive outside. There were setbacks. Marcus filed his first petition, only to have it denied. Jasmine pitched Angela's story to a large newspaper, but an editor told her, "It's not the kind of story people want to read." Caleb's platform was hacked by people who didn't want certain cases publicized. Corey lost a major donor for one of his community campaigns. But they refused to quit. Each failure only reminded them that Angela had endured worse. One evening, the four siblings gathered at Marcus's small apartment. They sat around his old wooden table, surrounded by stacks of papers and files. The air was tense but full of determination. Marcus looked at them and said, "We've come too far to stop now. Angela saved us when she had nothing. We owe her everything." Jasmine placed her hand on the table. "Then let's make this promise tonight. We will not stop until she is free." The twins nodded, their eyes fierce with conviction. That night, they stayed awake planning their next steps. Jasmine would prepare a full feature on Angela's life. Marcus would gather new evidence and file another appeal. Caleb would strengthen the online platform to spread awareness. Corey would organize marches and rallies to build public support. They realized they were no longer working individually, they were becoming a team. And in that small apartment, filled with papers and hope, something powerful began. Angela had once saved 4 homeless children at a bus stop. Now those children, grown and armed with education, skills, and love, were ready to save her. The world had no idea what was coming. Marcus sat at his desk late into the night, his lamp glowing softly against piles of papers, boxes of files, and notes pinned across the wall. The case of Angela Brown had consumed every part of him. It wasn't just work, it was personal, deeper than anything else he had ever taken on. He remembered the night she had been taken away, the fear in his younger siblings' eyes, the way Angela had told them to be strong. Now, almost 2 decades later, he was looking at every page of her trial and seeing what others had missed. Witnesses had not been cross-examined properly. Important evidence was never tested. The timeline of events didn't even line up. He felt anger rising in his chest, but also hope. This was something he could use. Jasmine worked in parallel, her notebooks filled with drafts, outlines, and interview notes. She had been contacting people quietly, speaking with neighbors who remembered Angela, teachers who had seen how she raised the children, even social workers who had visited her home. She wasn't a criminal, one woman told her. She was the kindest person on that block. She gave those kids more love than most people with everything in the world. Jasmine's pen shook as she wrote those words down. She knew they would carry weight. Meanwhile, Caleb's platform had started to grow rapidly. What began as a small site for families turned into a network that was being shared on social media. People from across the country wrote messages of support, sharing their own experiences of injustice. Caleb knew the power of data, so he created charts and visual timelines, making Angela's case easier for people to understand. Every click, every share, every comment was another voice added to the growing wave. Corey organized rallies. He stood on street corners with a microphone, telling Angela's story in plain words. She saved 4 children who had nothing, and for that kindness, she has been buried in prison for life. Does that sound like justice to you? People listened, clapped, and joined in. Soon, he had volunteers printing flyers, organizing marches, and raising funds for legal costs. The siblings' efforts began to converge. Marcus filed another appeal, this time backed by stronger evidence and legal precedents. Jasmine pitched her article again, but this time she came armed with testimonies, photographs of Angela with the children, and quotes from experts. A national newspaper finally agreed to publish it. When the story hit the front page, it spread like wildfire. People who had never heard of Angela Brown were suddenly asking questions: how could a woman with no violent history, who had raised children with love, be serving life? Angela's name began trending online. Caleb's platform was flooded with traffic, and Corey's rallies doubled in size. Strangers wrote letters to the prison, sending Angela encouragement. Some even began donating to the siblings' campaign fund. For the first time, Angela's story wasn't hidden in silence, it was breaking through walls. Inside the prison, Angela received the news in pieces. Guards passed her newspapers, fellow inmates showed her articles. She saw her children's faces in print, speaking out for her, and tears filled her eyes. "They didn't forget me," she whispered. She wrote back to them, "You are my miracle. Whatever happens, know I am already proud of you." Still, the road was not smooth. The state fought back against Marcus's appeal, arguing that the evidence was too old, the witnesses unreliable. Some people online dismissed the case, saying Angela must have done something to deserve it. These moments hurt, but the siblings refused to stop. Marcus spent weeks preparing for hearings, crafting arguments with precision. He worked with other lawyers who believed in the cause. Jasmine published follow-up pieces, interviewing legal experts who confirmed the trial had been flawed. Caleb improved the website, launching petitions that gathered thousands of signatures. Corey staged a massive rally on the courthouse steps, with banners reading, "Free Angela Brown," and chants that echoed down the street. The combined force was undeniable. Local television picked up the story. Soon, national networks were broadcasting segments about Angela's case. Talk shows debated it, legal scholars weighed in, and public opinion began to turn. Angela Brown was no longer just a name in an old file, she was a symbol of injustice, and her story touched hearts across the country. The siblings often gathered late at night, exhausted but energized. One evening, Marcus spread papers across the table and said, "We've got something. A witness who wasn't called back then is willing to testify now. He says Angela wasn't even near the scene that night." Jasmine's eyes lit up. That could change everything. Caleb immediately thought of how to document it, how to put the testimony online so people could see the truth. Corey planned a rally outside the courthouse on the day of the hearing, determined to make sure the world was watching. As the hearing date approached, the siblings felt the weight of 20 years pressing on them. Angela had lost so much time, and though no court could give it back, they were determined to win her freedom. They thought of the meals she had cooked for them, the nights she had stayed awake so they could sleep peacefully, the way she had whispered, "Be strong," as she was taken away. Now, it was their turn to be strong for her. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was surrounded by people. Reporters held microphones, cameras flashed, and banners filled the air. "Justice for Angela" was painted across signs held high by strangers who had come to stand with the siblings. Corey stood at the front, rallying the crowd. "We are here because love cannot be locked away forever," he shouted, and cheers followed. Inside, Marcus presented the case with calm determination. He spoke not just as a lawyer, but as the boy Angela had once saved. He outlined every flaw, every missing piece of evidence, every injustice. He showed the court the new testimony, the evidence that had been ignored, the reasons why Angela's conviction could not stand. Judges listened carefully, the courtroom silent except for his voice. Jasmine sat behind him, taking notes for her article, her eyes wet with emotion. Caleb updated the online community in real time, while Corey led chants outside that could be heard even within the courthouse walls. The siblings were no longer just four children struggling to survive, they had become a force. When the session ended that day, the decision wasn't immediate. The court announced they would review the case further. It was both hopeful and nerve-wracking. The siblings walked out to the sea of supporters, holding hands, their faces tired but shining. "We're closer than we've ever been," Marcus said quietly. Angela's story had finally reached the light. The world was watching, and the truth was beginning to speak louder than the lies that had once buried her. And though the fight wasn't over yet, there was a new certainty in the siblings' hearts: the woman who had once saved them would not be forgotten again. They would see this through until the end. The months after the hearing felt like years for Marcus, Jasmine, Caleb, and Corey. Every day, they woke up wondering if this would be the day the court announced its decision. They worked, they studied, they lived their lives, but in the background, Angela was always there, her face, her voice, her story. They checked the mail constantly, refreshed websites endlessly, and prayed in their own quiet ways. The waiting was heavy, but beneath it all was hope, stronger than fear. Angela, in prison, felt it too. She had been there for nearly 20 years, and though she had long learned patience, this wait was different. For the first time, she wasn't waiting alone. She had an army on the outside, her children, grown now, strong now, refusing to give up on her. Other women in the prison whispered about it. "They say your case is everywhere," one said. Angela only smiled softly. "My children are louder than these walls," she replied. One morning, Marcus received a call that made his hands tremble. The court had reached its decision, and a date was set for the ruling. He gathered his siblings immediately. They sat in his small apartment, the same table where they had once made promises to fight for Angela. "This is it," Marcus said. His voice cracked slightly, but his eyes were steady. Jasmine reached for his hand, Caleb and Corey joining too. "No matter what happens," Jasmine whispered, "she will know she was never forgotten." On the day of the ruling, the courthouse was overflowing. Reporters lined the steps, supporters carried signs, and strangers who had never met Angela came just to stand with her family. Corey organized chants that echoed across the square, "Justice for Angela. Free her now." The sound carried into the courthouse, a reminder that the world was watching. Inside, the siblings sat together, hearts pounding. Marcus wore his suit, calm on the outside but full of fire within. Jasmine clutched her notebook, her pen trembling. Caleb had his laptop open, ready to share the outcome with thousands of supporters online. Corey kept glancing back at the doors, imagining Angela walking through them someday. The judges entered, and the room fell silent. Words were spoken, legal terms passed back and forth, but the siblings barely heard them. Their ears strained for one phrase, one sentence that could change everything. Then it came: "The conviction of Angela Brown is hereby overturned." The words seemed to hang in the air before sinking in. Jasmine gasped, covering her mouth as tears rolled down her face. Marcus closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking from the weight of relief. Caleb grabbed Corey's arm, both of them nearly shouting out loud in disbelief. The courtroom erupted with sound gasps, cheers, applause. Outside, when the news reached the crowd, the chants turned into celebrations. Angela was free. The process took a few days before she could walk out, but those days felt lighter than all the years before. When the prison gates finally opened, Angela stepped out slowly, her eyes adjusting to the sunlight. She looked older, with lines that told stories of struggle, but her spirit was unbroken. She wore simple clothes, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bag of belongings. And there they were. Marcus, Jasmine, Caleb, and Corey stood waiting just beyond the gates. For a moment, they were children again, running to her like the night she had saved them at the bus stop. They wrapped their arms around her, holding her tightly as tears flowed freely. Angela whispered through sobs, "You came for me." Marcus answered softly, "Just like you came for us." Reporters captured the scene, cameras flashing, but for Angela and the children, the world faded away. It was only them, reunited after 2 decades of separation. The embrace lasted long, as if they could make up for all the lost time in one moment. Over the next weeks, Angela adjusted to life outside. Everything felt new: phones, technology, even the way the streets looked. But what mattered most was that she wasn't alone. Her children, now adults, guided her patiently. Caleb helped her with technology, teaching her how to use a phone and computer. Corey introduced her to the community that had supported her release. Jasmine wrote her story, giving Angela the chance to tell the world in her own words. Marcus sat with her late at night, explaining how the law had finally worked in her favor, though much too late. Angela often shook her head in wonder. "I took you in because it was the right thing," she told them one evening as they shared dinner around a table, laughter filling the room. "I never imagined you would be the ones to save me." Corey leaned forward with a smile. "You didn't just take us in. You taught us how to love, how to fight, how to stand strong. Everything we are today is because of you." She cried quietly then, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. For years, she had been seen only as a number in a prison system. Now she was seen again as a mother, as a woman, as a human being. Jasmine's article was published in newspapers and online platforms around the country. It told the story of Angela Brown, the woman who had saved 4 homeless children, only to be wrongfully imprisoned, and how those same children had grown up to win back her freedom. The piece touched millions, sparking conversations about justice, resilience, and the power of love. Angela's story became more than personal, it became a symbol of hope. Marcus continued his work as a lawyer, but with even more determination. He began representing other families who had been wronged, using his experience with Angela's case to fight for them. Jasmine became a respected journalist, known for her honesty and courage. Caleb expanded his platform into a nonprofit organization dedicated to wrongful convictions, helping families across the nation. Corey continued building movements in the community, ensuring that Angela's name would always be linked to justice and compassion. Angela herself found peace in simple things. Walking in the park, cooking meals again. Watching her children know, her grown family sit together and laugh. She had lost 20 years of freedom, but she had gained something many never find, proof that love can outlast walls, bars, and time itself. One evening, as the sun set, Angela sat on the porch with all 4 of them gathered around. The air was warm, and fireflies danced in the distance. She looked at them, her eyes full of pride. "Do you know what you gave me?" she asked softly. They looked at her curiously. "You gave me back my life. I gave you love when you needed it most, but you gave me freedom. There's no greater gift." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "No, Angela. You gave us everything first. We just returned the favor." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the kind of silence that feels like music. The journey had been long, the pain deep, but in the end, love had triumphed. Angela smiled through her tears, knowing that the circle was complete. She had once saved 4 children who had nothing, and 20 years later, those same children had saved her. And in that truth was a story that would live forever.